You know how sometimes you can stumble upon an old movie that no one seems to really talk about and it turns out to be like surprisingly good? Well, today I'm gonna look at some movies that I believe will become such hidden gems for audiences in the future and which you yourself may not have seen yet. Hey everyone, welcome back to this video series in which we're mapping out the best movies of the 2020s, the movies of this decade that I believe will endure. We've already looked at movies that will survive because they're just the most prestigious, we've looked at some movies that will become cult classics, and today we're gonna look at some hidden gems. These are movies that didn't make a big splash when they came out and still don't seem to be talked about that much, but which I believe are good enough that people in the future will find them and kind of uncover them again and revive them in a way, in a process that kind of keeps them alive. Jumping straight into the first movie on this list, we have Sometimes I Think About Dying.
Why do you like movies so much?
You get to look for some and then try to understand it.
And you like that?
I think the best way to describe this movie is as a sort of lo-fi The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Starring Daisy Ridley, we have a story set in a remote town where this woman is kind of living in imagination or in fantasy and not really connecting to real life.
I'm sorry. You want I can ask
She then meets this new coworker who is also a big cinephile and who shows her all these movies. And that way the two kind of connect and, I wouldn't say it's a love story per se, but it's more about this woman finding some connection to reality. Not in a literal sense though, but more so if you're like an introverted character, you can kind of end up getting stuck inside your own head and feeling like you're just passively observing everything that's happening on the outside. And this is one of those movies that really, in a very gentle, quiet way, presents the story of a person who was struggling with those aspects of their character and finds a way to kind of overcome them, or at least find a more healthy balance between being up there in your head and being out there in the world.
Do you have plans tonight?
I thought this was a very endearing movie and one that was surprisingly moving also because of a performance of a secondary character towards the end, which really caught me by surprise. There's basically this woman who really ends up grounding the main character with a thought-provoking speech that, was just really powerful.
It's hard, isn't it? Being a person.
Up next, we have Paul Schrader's Oh Canada. Despite this being a new Paul Schrader movie, the guy who also did First Reformed and who wrote Taxi Driver back in the day, I wasn't expecting too much of this one, mainly because so few people seemed to be talking about it. But I ended up checking it out and it was surprisingly tender and soulful, and it really was just this reflection of an old man looking back on his legacy, the meaning of his life, and that sort of strange disconnect between feeling like you've built up this persona that other people interact with and the person you feel yourself to be on the inside.
Is the camera rolling? What's going on?
It also has a great soundtrack by Phosphorescent, if I'm saying that correctly, which added a very heartfelt atmosphere to the whole movie, which was quite unlike Paul Schrader's earlier works, but which in some way does feel like his most vulnerable one, and I think it's in part based on his real life too. I haven't actually checked this, so I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, that, if anything, is the thing that stuck with me the most. It's just one of those movies that really puts you in a mood, and I can't really explain it any other way than that, except for maybe go see it or listen to the soundtrack, and then you'll know what I mean. Next up is Small Things Like These, starring Cillian Murphy.
Is it that you're just tired, love? Is that it?
Must be, yeah.
This was just one of my favorite movies last year, despite not seeing many people talk about it all that much. It's about this working class character in a small town who uncovers some kind of wrongdoing or injustice that's being committed in a local school, or I'm not sure how you call it. It's like this religious institution with nuns that house and educate young women or girls who are kind of strayed from their families. But what he discovers is that there's some things going on there that are not so nice, and it really becomes a story of morality and doing the right thing when everyone around you just seems to ignore the obvious or seems to ignore the evil that's going on because it's just inconvenient to do so. This institution has a lot of power over the community. They donate money or whatever. I forget the exact politics of it.
People can make things difficult for you.
But yeah, that central question of how do we act in the face of evil when everyone else is quietly being complicit, that to me is at the center of this.
What if it was one of ours?
Oh, God, isn't that what I'm saying? They're not our girls.
And what I love the most about it, perhaps, even more than what it presents, is the way it does so. Like, it's not preachy at all. It is a very quiet movie, a very atmospheric movie. It reminded me of some Bela Tarr movies, even, with that kind of moody fall, winter aesthetic, and very grainy, very dirty and rough looking. It's a movie that just really puts you in this harsh environment, which is then contrasted by Cillian Murphy's character, who is, as opposed to the world he lives in, he seems like this very tender, very sensitive man who, we see some flashbacks from him as a child, who used to be like an even more sensitive boy and who himself had a troubled past that is sort of affecting him in the future still.
You've always been soft-hearted, Bill. Giving away your change in your pockets.
But I just love the subtle characterization of him, that he is, on the one hand, this kind of rough-edged, blue-collar worker, but on the other hand, he is just this really sensitive soul and someone whose kindness and vulnerability, in a way, is looked down upon as just being that, as being like a vulnerability or being a weakness, when instead he ends up being the character who is actually the strongest of them all, who is actually doing something and bringing some goodness into the world. And I think especially nowadays, that's just the kind of story that really resonates with me, and one that I hope more people will enjoy and resonate with in the future. Moving on to Godland. I will always have a weak spot for movies that are shot on these beautiful natural locations, and Godland is just such a prime example of that. It's the story of this priest who travels to Iceland to connect with the locals and to establish a church, basically. It's a journey that envelops through these beautiful vistas and beautiful landscapes, and it's all filmed very wonderfully, very quietly, very atmospherically, which, considering the last few movies on this list, you can imagine is something I really enjoy. But as the priest settles down and tries to connect with the locals, it also becomes a story about something else. It becomes more about colonialism and the more general idea of trying to force the world into your own view of it. There's this kind of metaphor that runs throughout the movie where the priest will take photos of everything he sees, which in this sense can also be interpreted as him trying to capture it into his own lens, or trying to capture it through his own lens and into an image that is his. And in that sense, there's friction that arises between him and the local community and between him and the natural world around him. And so also on that more symbolical level, it becomes a story about a man of God versus the world of God, and it becomes like a story about hubris, about vanity, about misconceptions about what the world is, what God is, and what we should do in relation to him. And yeah, it all plays out very quietly, lots of like long, lingering takes. A lot of this is all just like suggested, hinted at. It's not made explicit or didactic, which I also really appreciate. But yeah, so all in all, a very beautiful movie, a very pure and raw one when it comes to like capturing the natural world. And just also like a very fascinating one in narrative terms. Moving away from the past and into the present, we have a very strange movie called Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World. Again, this is a very strange movie. It's about this woman who is just working in her home city, and it's basically just a series of vignettes of her life in modern Europe. She's just driving around, doing chores, being this sort of social media personality.
Bă, nu uita să dați like și share, da?
It's been a while since I've seen it, so I don't remember the exact story structure or the exact plotline beneath it all. I think I saw it on Mubi. But as time passed, I found this movie was really sticking with me in a way I couldn't quite explain or articulate. There's just something about the way this movie captures the absurdity of modern life and the banal ways in which a society and humanity in general is slowly eroding, or at least it captures the feeling of the way that's happening, and just that feeling of finding yourself slowly drifting away from any kind of collective center or collective idea of unity. I'm not sure if I'm making a lot of sense here, but it's just a movie that really captures the strangeness of being alive right now and the feeling of having these moments of epiphany where you're really looking around and seeing at all the strangeness that we are doing to ourselves and doing to each other, and just that we're being a part of, the cultures that we're creating, the technologies that we're using, the kind of art that we're making even. And again, it's the absurdity of all that sometimes can really hit you, and I feel like this movie is kind of an encapsulation of that exact feeling. It's an art house movie. It's on the edge of like avant-garde even, I'd say, or experimental. But still, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are gonna resonate with just the texture of this and the feeling of it. And again, just the way it captures something I think a lot of us are experiencing right now. Speaking of really strange movies that capture the absurdity of modern existence, next up we have Red Rooms.
Would you like to send it now?
Yes.
Okay, sending.
In my Letterboxd review of this movie, I called it a bone-chilling exploration of the psychological damage inflicted by the digital ages, catering to our worst impulses while also completely neutering the better angels of our nature. I think that still captures the gist of it, but just to add some additional context, this movie has a really interesting protagonist in the sense that we really do not get to read or understand anything about her inner motivations or desires or goals or whatnot, all the things that normally define a protagonist basically. And we follow this character who does seem to have some morbid curiosity for following murder trials, and following one in particular where a man killed a very young girl, and this woman, she becomes kind of fascinated by it, she becomes obsessed with it. And in that sense it explores the kind of fascination that a lot of people seem to have with real life murder documentaries or true crime stories, and just the way a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma is being exploited for entertainment on the internet or through storytelling in TV or YouTube videos or whatever. But as the story progresses, it also becomes clear that this is about something deeper, this is about some deeper corruption of the human soul, basically. The way we're organizing our culture currently, the way we're organizing social media, technology, that sort of stuff, is all kind of facilitating that erosion of the soul, or that hollowing out of the soul. And so yeah, while this movie doesn't show like any shocking or disturbing footage directly, it is nevertheless one that manages to be very unnerving in other ways, in just showing a kind of depravity or a kind of inhumanity that is honestly just, again, it's just bone-chilling, as I said in my Letterboxd review, but yeah, as a work of art, it's also a very fascinating one. Okay, moving on to something a bit more relaxed, we've got Wim Wenders' Perfect Days. I think this is probably the most well-known movie on this list, even though I think it's nevertheless being not talked about enough for it to have been on the other lists, and so I wanted to include it here. The story is just a couple of days in the life of a man who cleans public toilets in Tokyo and just quietly goes about his everyday life. And yeah, he doesn't have too much else going on. I think this is really one of those movies in the vein of like Patterson, which I included in my top 50, movies that really focus and try to capture the poetry of everyday life, and that have a kind of anti-plot where every time something seems to happen, it kind of doesn't. It's the kind of stories that are less about a character going through growth or transformation, and more about them kind of embracing or going through the cycles of everyday life and finding a kind of peace and tranquility in repetition and the open-endedness of their own story and their own life. And I think movies like that are really important and really insightful if you watch them every now and then. I don't think every movie has to be like this, but they have that kind of living in the now insight or message indirectly that I do feel like we need to remind ourselves of every now and then. And this movie just does it so wonderfully. It's a really beautiful shot movie. It's a really relaxed movie, one that you can easily watch on a loop, basically, if you'd want to. It's just one that has a nice flow to it, a kind of tranquility even. And one that I think people will continue to enjoy. Next up is a movie that really few people have seen yet, because I don't think it's released yet. I saw it at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a German movie, the first one I actually saw on the festival, and it's called Sound of Falling. I also included a movie from the Cannes Film Festival on my previous cult classic list, and as I did with that one, I'm also not going to talk about this one too much yet, because again, I know most people haven't seen this one yet. But just speaking in the most general terms, this is a movie about a generation of women who are bound together by place and circumstances and family lines, who are each struggling with their own existence in some way, as if all of them are kind of haunted by this emptiness or this longing for something more than they have, and they don't necessarily end up finding it, but I think it's a movie that's more about how that sort of existential phantom pain ends up being our most important connection point. And that's something that I thought was really beautiful about this movie, the way it really captured that idea of humanity all being part of this bigger soul that everyone's connected to, but we can only see our own little sliver of it, and yet we kind of long to become part of this greater whole, but at the same time we're not sure what exactly that is. Maybe it's just death or nothingness or a void. It's not a movie that's going to give you any answers, but it does very well, very quietly, very thoughtfully articulate these questions and these struggles. So yeah, I'm not sure when this releases. I think Mubi picked up the partial rights at least, so it might be on there at some point. But, whenever or wherever it releases for you, definitely keep an eye out for this one. Up next, we have The Quiet Girl. On the surface, this is a really simple and straightforward movie about a young girl who is living in a kind of troubled family situation and then stays with some relatives for the summer, who she ends up really connecting with and who kind of bring her out of her shell a little bit.
We'll keep the child gladly. She's more than welcome.
But I love the way this was all told, very much from the perspective of the young girl who's just quietly observing everything around her and who just has a very relatable psychology to her. There's a short review of this one on Letterboxd that I really liked, which said that they really got the feeling of when you're a child and things just happen to you and everything dimly feels like your fault. I think that one indeed captured the feeling of this movie really well. And in addition, I'll also say that it's a story that is very powerful in the way it shows the impact that caring adults can have on a child's life. It's also one of those movies where if you're looking to adopt or thinking about adopting children, this is one that's going to be very inspiring for you, or maybe push you over the edge if you were kind of indecisive about it. Because again, it really just shows the importance of kindness and generosity and care and love on a child's life, and how much of an impact you can be making with even like the smallest of gestures and just the smallest of kindnesses. And that's something that I thought was really powerful in a really understated way.
Isn't your mammy good to you?
Yeah, it's just really one of those movies where you kind of surrender yourself to it, and you'll find yourself all teary-eyed by the end of it, if not in full breakdown mode. But again, in like a very inspiring and uplifting way. The last movie on this list is The World to Come. I just saw this one a couple of weeks ago, but was kind of surprised that I hadn't even heard about it until then, which may have been my fault, but still I do think this really is a movie worth talking about and worth watching.
Good afternoon.
It's about two women on the American frontier who develop this relation together, which in the context of their circumstances and the historical time period is kind of doomed to fail or doomed to fall apart. In this sense, it's kind of reminiscent of Portrait of a Lady on Fire, except this movie is less passionate in a direct sense. It's less about putting these two women together and seeing their romance develop, as much as it is about them being apart and the kind of in-between moments of a romance that also end up defining it.
Your smile stopped. Was it meant for someone else?
Sorry, my mind was elsewhere.
So for example, instead of having like steamy romance scenes, we have one character who's just waiting in anticipation for the other to arrive, and we see the longing that they feel when the other one's gone, and the way they kind of savor each other after they were together. You know, we see the happiness that comes after them being together and the way it kind of slowly fades away again the longer they are apart. So yeah, that's something that I thought was rather unique about this movie. Just the way it kind of navigates the margins of a love story rather than consuming it directly head on.
I always feared that I would bring misfortune to those I loved.
It also has some great supporting roles from the male counterparts. It's beautifully filmed with a lot of attention to detail to the historical period, and just an atmosphere that I thought was very captivating and very enjoyable.
When she left, I was like a skiff at sea, with neither hand nor helm to guide it.
And that's the end of part 3 of this video series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have suggestions, again, as always, let me know. It's been a lot of fun reading your reactions and additions. You know, a lot of them, I wish I could have included them as well, but I kind of set myself the limit of having only 10 movies for each video. Otherwise, this is just gonna go on forever. But I'm definitely approaching the comment section as a sort of expansion of this list. So definitely keep adding your suggestions and your movies into it. We have one more category coming up, and that's the blockbuster favorites. You know, the big entertainment movies that we're gonna rewatch forever. If you have any suggestions for those, again, let me know, and thank you all for watching. Thank you for following me on this second channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.